Hi guys, welcome to this edition of ArmCare IQ. Today we're going to talk about inversion training, but in particular, inverted closed chain shoulder training. It's going to be pretty exciting because it's a relatively old way of training, but it's really new for the sport of baseball. If you guys are liking what you're listening to, please subscribe to us on YouTube and hit the like button. And we are also including our link to our newsletter in the YouTube video description. And in our newsletter, we go into deeper insights related to our ArmCare IQs. We introduce our podcasts and our blogs, and we also offer promotional incentives. For those of you who are watching, we are going to be providing a 1-month promotion where we're providing you with a code to get 10% off our ArmCare kit. So this is a great thing for the off season and a lot of our athletes that are going back to school and college, that this can be greatly beneficial to their performance programs. So here we go. Just starting out, I wanted to talk about how I came about this inverted closed chain shoulder training. When I was first hired for the Baltimore Orioles in 2012, I was brought in by the man on the right here named Brady Anderson. And Brady was the VP of baseball operations, and he was also working on, improving the training for the major league team and throughout the minor leagues. And so I was introduced to various forms of training that I was unfamiliar with. Olympic lifting in baseball. I always had the thought process that it would be risky for the throwing arm, the shoulder and elbow. But we had an educational process that went from the very grassroots level all the way to the major league level to progress performance using that type of training. However, one of the things that I thought was interesting, you can see in this picture, there's a wall, and what you can't see is that there was a floor of crash mats interlocking. And this particular wall was utilized for handstand training. And I had been a gymnast up until the age of 13 years old while I was playing baseball, and I had never had a shoulder issue my entire playing career. But there was a very strong emphasis on teaching athletes how to do handstands. Now, not every athlete had participated in that type of training, but we encouraged them with different types of progressions to be able to, train that way. And I'm going to get into some of the deeper details of why it's important in this particular ArmCare IQ session. So what are the differences between open and closed chain exercise? And this is where the rubber meets the road. Most of the training that is done for the shoulder outside of high resistance training with bands is usually open chain, either with wrist weights or dumbbells. But essentially you're moving up into the air, you're not fixed on anything. And it means that the arm bones are moving in relation to the scapula. So the scapula has to be the stable structure, while your humerus, which is your long arm bone, is able to move about in 3D space overhead. And so that is what we call a proximal distal muscle activation. Proximal means just closer to the center point of the body. So my shoulder blade is obviously proximal to my arm. It's closer to the center point of my body. It's part of my trunk, essentially. But when you look at closed chain training, now you have your hands on the ground. And that means that you're fixing your arms and now allowing the proximal segment to move about the fixed distal segment. So that means that you're moving in a distal to proximal muscle activation. And you're going to see some other images in terms of, what this means to the inverted position. So one of the key issues related to shoulder problems is something we call scapular dyskinesia. And you can see in this picture that there's a winging appearance of the scapula, and usually it's anteriorly rotated. So if the pecs are tight, they're pulling the scapula down, the shoulder blade down, and then the muscles of the serratus and the rhomboids, which are at the back, are very weak. So it causes the shoulder blade in a resting position to sit out. And usually what happens is the athlete is limited in what we call scapular humeral rhythm. And that's just a long term to say that the shoulder blade has to move to allow the arm to raise up. And it usually goes into a 1 degree to 2 degree relationship. So for every 1 degree that my scapula can upwardly rotate, that means that my arm can rotate upwards by 2 degrees. And so you can see to get to 180 degrees, the scapula is basically moving towards 90 degrees. And so if I have shoulder problems and I don't have good stability, especially with my serratus and the muscles that stabilize the shoulder blade, I'm not going to be able to lift overhead. And that brings us to a problem called shoulder impingement. And that's where some of the rotator cuff fibers are getting pinched against the acromion, which is the part of the scapula that attaches to the clavicle at the front. And it's getting crushed underneath there because the shoulder blade isn't moving upward and posterior to create space. So you're getting pinching. So we need to have a healthy scapular humeral rhythm to allow the arm to upwardly rotate, or it's going to change the way in which you position your arm for ball release. And we want consistent deliveries, and we want to make sure that the athlete's strong in an overhead position. So let's get to this vertical closed chain concept. So you can see that I got a picture of a handstand. And what's happening is now, if you took that picture of looking at the shoulder blade being rotated up, well, now it's just rotating away from the arm in an upward position. And you can see that ground reaction force is actually going into the shoulder joint. And the interesting thing is in the pitching delivery, just after ball release, when you have an outstretched arm, the forces are generally over body weight. So how do you train that? It's not really practical, and it's not safe to do overhead pressing with your body weight to gain that strength. It's too much weight, and you're in open chain, and there's a lot of perturbations, oscillations, and it doesn't make sense for baseball. But in order to get that type of force to be able to be withstood and to be able to be controlled in the shoulder joint, you need to be able to be inverted. So you're getting ground reaction force going through the shoulder joint. You're also getting, in the purple line that I'm showing you, you're also getting forces from the body going into the shoulder joint. So now you're essentially getting that body weight force that's being stabilized in what I call a dual vector co-contraction. All the muscles around the shoulder and the shoulder blade, they have to contract and stabilize in the overhead position to be able to handle the contact force that's going up through the ground, and also the resultant gravitational force of the body weight that's going into the shoulder joint. So you're developing a lot of strength through that co-contracted position and overhead. And I'm just showing you a video. If you think baseball players can't do this, for those of you that are watching out there, you're wrong. This is a major league pitcher that's pretty well known. We're talking about someone who has a more expensive arm than probably anybody who's watching this right now. And he's doing a crossed flexion extension pattern while in a handstand, which is very impressive. Now, do you need to be able to do a handstand with that type of proficiency? Not really, but you do need to have some concept of this inverted training in closed chain. So let's get into some progressions. The first, you should be able to do a push-up to a downward dog, and I'm demonstrating these exercises for you so you can see them. But essentially, you're in a push-up position. But to activate the serratus, you need to get over the shoulder height. So when you're pressing, a push-up on its own doesn't have the same amount of activation in terms of when you're pushing away, because it's allowing the shoulder blade to protract more in an upward position. So this has a pause. So it's not free flowing. There's an actual stop. And then all of a sudden you're just going back into a downward dog position. Okay, so that's progression one, where you're starting to get inverted. Progression two is a little different. Okay, so now there's a little bit more of a continuous flow of how this is working. And what this is the push-up cobra to downward dog. You can see that there's a rolling action where the body is moving through from the cobra position. And you can see I'm very limited in thoracic extension. You might have a way greater cobra position, but essentially it's moving in this circular pattern where I am not pausing, and there's a little bit heavier emphasis on the triceps in this particular exercise. And the triceps is also an important muscle to stabilize the medial elbow. Most people don't know that. They think of the forearm flexors and the pronator muscles and also the biceps, but the tricep also stabilizes valgus stress and throwing. So you're getting a little bit of tricep work here. So that's the next progression. Now, once you're able to master the cobra to downward dog, you would go to a foot elevated position on a stability ball. And that is now where the feet are now above the hands, and you can get more vertical. And it gives it a nice challenge because there's some perturbation of the stability ball rolling around. So I'll just play the video here. You can see how I'm basically getting into my downward dog, but I'm essentially more vertical, pulling my toes towards my hands. And then I'm trying to send my head through. You know, the key is trying to get the ears between your arms. So your neck is in more or less a straight position. And then when you come back to rolling, you know, we try to create a double chin to, you know, have good alignment from the neck all the way through the hips to the ankles. And that gets us now a little bit closer to getting towards our handstand progression. So let's go to the next progression. So now we're starting to get vertical. Okay. And, you know, when you're getting into handstands, it's important that you have a soft surface if you're inexperienced, because you are going to fall at times. So you definitely want to be either on the grass or you want to be on a crash mat when you're doing the freestanding handstands. But now as a progression, we're going to be doing a wall supported handstand. And so you want to get pretty close to the wall and you have a pretty good kick up to the wall, find the wall. And you're going to see now I'm trying to send my head through so my ears are even with my arms. Okay, but I'm getting a little bit more courageous attempting to do a handstand by bringing my heels off the wall. So it's a good idea to start to teach yourself the proprioception of how to hold your handstand. The wall is just a great guide, and you don't need someone to hold you, and you don't need a spotter. So if you have a wall, it's a really good implement to use. But then, you know, try to feel out what it's like to bring your feet off the wall so you can start to develop the actual handstand pattern. Okay. So that is the wall supported handstand. So next, now when you're in a handstand, some athletes don't have a lot of wrist mobility and extension. And so you don't want to make them uncomfortable. So the wall supported handstand you can utilize with something called parallettes. And parallettes are like handles. People use them for push-ups. You can use dumbbells, which I'm going to show you in this particular example. But that basically puts the wrist in alignment where you're not in hyperextension. And obviously, when you get vertical, the extension is even greater. Now, I will tell you, when I started getting back into handstands without a parallette, with an extended wrist, I improved my front rack position for front squatting. And we're not talking about front squatting here, but I believe in front squatting over back squatting for baseball players, particularly in terms of how the spine is aligned and the load that's placed upon the spine. But if you have somebody that has wrist extension issues, it might be a good idea to allow them to experience some training being inverted with an extended wrist. So, you know, here's the adaptation if the athlete finds that they have a lot of discomfort, and essentially you're just holding the handles and you're doing the same thing. You could utilize this for a free handstand, but you got to make sure that you get away from the dumbbells. I think the parallettes that are smaller and they don't stick out as much are a safer option if you ended up going over and you have to, you know, tuck into a roll. But this is a great option in training and really, you know, can protect the wrist. Okay, the next progression are kick-ups. And this is when we start to build in getting towards a free handstand. So on the left, you can see, you know, at the beginning, I'm just trying to get a little momentum. I'm not trying to get up too high, but you're just getting used to what it's like to be inverted with your feet up in the air without any kind of prop or wall. And you just gain confidence. You know, you may do a little bit of a hand walk because you're trying to get stability, but they're just very low kick-ups. And remember, you want to be on a surface that's padded. You want to be in an absorbent surface. If you do happen to tip over, tuck your head in and roll, and you should be okay. So, you know, once you gain a little bit of confidence with the low kick-ups, you can get to some of the more accelerated versions of really pushing off the floor and getting into your handstand. And you don't have to hold it for very long. It's just essentially just to get used to what it's like to being on your hands, you know, and this is kind of the pattern that we get to in terms of getting to a full handstand. And I'm going to show you the full handstand next. So the full handstand is you basically prepare yourself mentally and kick up fast. You're creating a lot of momentum to get towards your handstand. And then you're basically trying to hold that thing, keeping your core tight and doing your best to keep your ears between your arms. And then you are going to be fully inverted, and you're going to have this dual vector co-contraction and stabilization for your shoulder. The next progression is actually the wall walk. So this is a little more intense because of the time under tension, and there's actually co-contraction elements and movement. So the wall walk, I think, is pretty much the most intense out of all of them, personally. And you can see how that's done. It's a reverse handstand. You're actually walking yourself into the wall, and you're getting to the point where you're in your handstand position, ears between your arms. You're trying to be as steady as possible, and then you're walking back out until your entire body is parallel with the ground, to the wall. And some people add push-ups in terms of the wall walks. There's a lot of different variations you can do, but there's a lot of force that you're transmitting, especially when you take a hand off the ground and you're now distributing that force to one shoulder. So it's a little more intense than the handstands on their own, especially if they're moving. So in closing, it's never too late to start training this dual vector co-contraction of handling ground reaction force through your arm and the body weight forces going into the shoulder joint and being able to stabilize, so that you're getting a very high level co-contraction that will stabilize the shoulder after release point. Whether you are a 4-year-old who's just learning how to do this, or an incredibly advanced major league pitcher, you will see benefits going through the progression of putting your hands on the floor. So it's important, as a general safety point, you need to have a soft surface that you can land. If you have wrist issues, make sure to use the parallettes, where you can put your wrist in more of a neutral position, and try not to put limitations on your training, because the body can be trained to do anything as long as it's progressed properly. Thanks for listening.